Tesla's official story, the one they tell the government, is that its most critical life or death. Safety reports are months late because of simple data collection issues, a clerical error, a glitch in the system, an administrative oversight. But you need to understand something right now. When federal investigators get involved, when they start issuing formal, legally binding probes not just into the crashes themselves, but into the delays that isn't about paperwork anymore, that's the first sign of a cover-up. And the evidence that's slowly, painfully being dragged into the light points to something far more deliberate, far more calculated, and far more dangerous for every single person on the road. This is the story of a conspiracy of silence, happening in plain sight. This is the real reason Tesla is stalling on its crash reports, and what it reveals about the true safety of the software. It calls full self-driving the software that is operating on the street right outside your house. Right now, the dream of a car that drives itself is one of the most powerful technological promises of our lifetime. It's not just a product, it's a vision of utopia sold to us for a premium, a promise of absolute safety, a future where the millions of hours we collectively waste in traffic are magically returned to us. A world without human error on the road. And no company has sold that dream with more force, more conviction than Tesla. With its full self-driving software now deployed on millions of vehicles, Tesla has crowned itself the undisputed king of autonomy. Its executives stand on stages at shareholder meetings and boast about the data, about the over 8.2 billion miles of FSD driving they've logged. A number so colossal, so incomprehensibly vast, it's designed to make you believe they know more about real-world driving than any other entity on the planet. Their entire brand, their multi-hundred-billion-dollar valuation, is built on this single perception data-driven supremacy. They are the company of the future, a company of pure information. But what happens when that perfect futuristic technology fails? What happens when the machine that's supposed to be infallibly safer than a human has a wreck? You'd think a company whose entire identity, whose very soul is built on data, would be the most transparent. You would imagine they would be pathologically eager to dissect every failure, to share exactly what went wrong in excruciating detail, just to prove how quickly they were fixing it, how relentlessly they were iterating towards perfection. You would expect a full, immediate public breakdown of every single incident. Instead, we are getting the precise opposite. We are witnessing silent, months-long delays in mandatory government crash reporting, a pattern of behavior so consistent it can only be strategic. We're seeing a federal investigation launched into those very delays, a sign that regulators believe they are being lied to. And when the data finally does emerge, dragged out under threat of legal action, it's a chaotic mess of blacked out text, statistical games, and strategic redactions that seem engineered to confuse, not to clarify. The official line? It's just a paperwork problem, a few bugs in their reporting system. But the deeper you dig, the more that story simply utterly falls apart. This isn't about a few late files. This is about a pattern of delays, of secrecy, and of data manipulation that calls into question the very safety claims that prop up Tesla's entire brand. And today, we're going to pull on that thread of secrecy until the whole thing unravels. To truly understand the depth of this deception, you first need to understand the rules of the game. This isn't some voluntary feel-good corporate program where companies share what they want when they want. This is a federal mandate. In 2021, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA, issued what's known as a Standing General Order. Think of it as a non-negotiable command to the entire automotive industry, a new set of laws for a new era of technology. It states that any company manufacturing or deploying cars with advanced driver assist systems from the most basic, lane-keeping tech in a Toyota to Tesla's wildly ambitious, full self-driving has to report every single crash to the federal government. No exceptions. And the deadlines are no joke for a terrifyingly simple reason. For any crash involving a fatality, a hospitalization, a vehicle being towed from the scene, an airbag deployment, or a collision with a vulnerable road user like a cyclist or pedestrian. The automaker has just one day to file a report. One single day. Not a business day. 24 hours. For all other less serious crashes where the advanced system was active, they get a monthly reporting deadline. The entire purpose of this system is to give federal regulators a near real-time, unfiltered feed on how this new technology is performing on public roads. It's an early warning system, designed to spot a deadly trend before it spirals out of control. Is a certain model of car suddenly struggling at intersections? After a software update? Is a new version of an autonomy system confused by emergency vehicles at night? Public safety, your safety. My safety literally depends on this data being fast, accurate, and complete. It's the tripwire for preventing a single glitch from becoming a national tragedy. This is precisely where Tesla's official story begins to look. Not just strange, but fundamentally unbelievable. Federal regulators, the very people tasked with monitoring this constant stream of data, noticed a glaring, ominous problem. The stream wasn't flowing. In fact, reports from Tesla, arguably the biggest and most important player in the entire program, weren't coming in after one day. They were showing up months late, sometimes arriving in enormous batch data dumps long after the incidents occurred, making it completely impossible for NHTSA to do its primary job of identifying and reacting to immediate safety threats. The early warning system was being systematically blinded. When federal officials asked the obvious question, what in the world is going on? Tesla offered an explanation that sounds plausible if you don't think about it for more than 5 seconds. The company blamed data collection issues. In official communications with the government, they claimed their internal systems for gathering, processing, and reporting the required information were flawed. Their digital filing cabinet was a mess. But don't worry, they said. We've identified the problem, and we've fixed it now. Let's just pause and absorb the sheer, unmitigated audacity of that claim. This is Tesla. This is the company that defines itself by its software genius. A company whose founder is seen by millions as a real-life Tony Stark, a wizard of code and silicon. A company that can develop and push a phenomenally complex software update to millions of cars across the entire globe overnight with the press of a single button. A company whose entire full self-driving program is built on the premise of collecting and processing incomprehensible amounts of data every single second from every single car. This is the company claiming it has trouble with basic digital paperwork, but only, coincidentally, when that paperwork concerns the most critical, most legally sensitive, and most reputationally damaging safety events imaginable. It's like hearing that Google is having trouble finding an email, or that Amazon has misplaced a package. It's an excuse that asks you to believe that a global technology giant, valued at hundreds of billions of dollars, has the organizational competence of a disorganized corner store. More than that, it asks you to ignore the fundamental logic of their own business. This specific crash data should be the single most important, most tracked, and most readily accessible information in their entire global system. Every single crash is a potential lawsuit, a regulatory nightmare, a public relations disaster, and a critical data point for improving the very system they claim is the future of transportation. The idea that this information is just hard to find, lost in some digital couch cushions, is fundamentally, profoundly unbelievable. On the surface, it's a simple, boring story of a bureaucratic slip-up. Oops, we had a problem with our reporting software, but it's all better now. But NHTSA, the federal agency in charge, clearly wasn't buying it. The agency launched a formal investigation called an audit query, not just into the crashes themselves, but into the reason the reports were so consistently, strategically late. They demanded to know the real root cause for the delays. And critically, they wanted to know if there are even more crashes that Tesla just hasn't bothered to report at all. This is where the simple story of a data collection issue starts to completely unravel, revealing something that feels far more calculated. The problem wasn't just that the data was late. The problem is what that lateness appears to be hiding. That federal probe into late reporting wasn't a one-off incident. It wasn't just a slap on the wrist. It was the first public signal of a much larger, more disturbing pattern of avoidance and obstruction that is now coming into sharp, terrifying focus. Because while Tesla was busy, blaming internal tech glitches for its late safety filings, a second, even more serious federal investigation was starting to build momentum. And this is where the data collection excuse starts to look less like a genuine explanation and more like a deliberate, calculated strategy of information warfare. On October 7, 2025, NHTSA opened what's known as a preliminary evaluation, a file cataloged as PE25-012. This wasn't about late paperwork anymore. This was about the fundamental performance and safety of the full self-driving system itself. The agency had identified a deeply troubling pattern of at least 58 separate incidents, where Teslas operating on FSD allegedly performed dangerous and illegal maneuvers. We're not talking about minor glitches. We're talking about cars running red lights, blowing through stop signs, or even more, terrifyingly, swerving directly into the path of oncoming traffic. This investigation has since expanded to cover an estimated 2.88 million Tesla vehicles on American roads, practically every modern Tesla in the country. As part of that high-stakes probe, NHTSA sent Tesla a massive and legally binding information request on December 3, 2025. They demanded everything. The agency didn't want summaries or press releases. They wanted the raw, ugly truth. They demanded data on all customer complaints related to these failures, all internal safety reviews, details on any lawsuits, and most importantly, the core forensic data for every single relevant crash. We're talking about the video footage from the car's 8 cameras, the black box event data recorder logs, and the raw CAN bus, data the vehicle's electronic nervous system, which records every single command and sensor reading in the moments leading up to a disaster. The deadline for Tesla to hand over this mountain of evidence was set for January 19, 2026. That deadline came and went. Tesla delivered nothing. A complete and total radio silence. Then, just as the deadline was officially breached, on January 12th, Tesla's lawyers sent a letter to NHTSA. Their argument was astonishing. They were overwhelmed. The company that boasts of its godlike data processing power claimed it still had over 8,300 individual records to review by hand, and that its dedicated team could only get through about 300 a day. They complained that having to respond to multiple, overlapping federal probes at once was unduly burdensome and was actually hurting the quality of their responses. Let that sink in for a moment. The company that has built its name and its stock price on having the most advanced vehicle, data platform on Earth was now officially, in writing, arguing that providing that very data to the federal agency, in charge of keeping the public safe, was simply too much work. In a move that some insiders described as a final accommodation, a gesture of almost saintly patience, NHTSA granted them a significant 5-week extension, pushing the new, supposedly non-negotiable deadline to February 23, 2026. It wasn't final. As that second deadline loomed, Tesla's lawyers came back again, hat in hand, asking for yet more time. And on February 20th, just 3 days before the deadline expired, NHTSA caved once more, granting a second extension and pushing the final delivery date to March 9, 2026. This is the pattern. This isn't one glitch. It's a consistent, documented, multi-month refusal, or perhaps inability, to provide the most critical safety data to the very agency in charge of protecting the public from dangerous products. And it brings us right back to that flimsy, almost insulting initial excuse: data collection issues. How can a company that just boasted in a February 2026 shareholder meeting of logging over 8.2 billion FSD, miles a company that processes, by its own admission, over 1 million pixels of visual data every millisecond in every single car, claim it can't find a few thousand crash files for federal investigators? It just doesn't add up. The logic collapses on itself. It points to one of two possibilities, and both are terrifying for anyone who shares the road with these vehicles. Possibility 1. Tesla's data management systems are a complete and utter disaster, a chaotic, unsearchable mess of disconnected databases and broken processes. This would represent an incredible, almost unbelievable, level of corporate incompetence for a company whose entire valuation is based on its technological prowess. It would mean the geniuses are frauds, or there's possibility 2, the delays are strategic. That the data isn't hard to find, it's hard to hand over. That it's hard to hand over because it contains a clear, undeniable pattern of FSD failures that would shatter the company's carefully constructed, multi-billion-dollar image of superhuman safety. That by delaying, batching, and slow-walking these files, Tesla is attempting to manage the narrative, control the flow of bad news, and prevent anyone from seeing the full, ugly picture of FSD's real-world performance all at once. Given the stakes and how utterly absurd the "it's too much work" claim is for a data-centric company like Tesla, the evidence is pointing hard, almost inescapably, toward option 2. The delays themselves are the story. The silence is the confession, and it forces us to ask the most important question of all. What is in that data that Tesla is so desperately afraid for us to see? As we're about to find out, the few pieces that have already slipped through, the cracks are painting a very dark picture indeed. Delaying the data is just one tool in the corporate toolbox of opacity. It's the first line of defense. But what happens when Tesla, after months of stalling and extensions and legal maneuvering, finally submits its reports? You would think that after all the waiting, we would get some answers, some measure of clarity. But what we're actually finding is that the data, when it does arrive, is often rendered completely and utterly useless by design. It's an act of malicious compliance. They give you the document, but they steal the story inside it. The most shocking and undeniable example of this comes from a small, contained experiment in Austin, Texas. Since June of 2025, Tesla has been operating a limited paid Robotaxi service in the city. These are Teslas equipped with the very same FSD software that is in millions of consumer cars, navigating public streets to pick up and drop off paying customers. It is the ultimate real-world test, a direct, public-facing look at the system's true capabilities when the stakes are real. And as a federally regulated commercial operator, Tesla is required to report every single crash, no matter how minor, to NHTSA. And they have been crashing. As of early 2026, public records show that the small Austin Robotaxi fleet has been involved in at least 14 separate crashes. And these aren't just little fender benders in a parking lot. The official list of incidents includes a Tesla hitting a cyclist, a Tesla involved in a crash with a city bus while the Tesla was stopped, a Tesla hitting a heavy truck, a Tesla backing into a stationary pole, and most alarmingly, at least one crash that resulted in an injury serious enough to require hospitalization. Now here's the kicker. This is the part that transforms the story from one of corporate clumsiness to one of profound, almost breathtaking public deception. We went into the public NHTSA database to look at the official reports for these incidents. For every single one of those 14 crashes, the official narrative, summary the section of the report that is supposed to explain in plain English what actually happened says the exact same thing. Redacted may contain confidential business information. Let me repeat that, because it is the single, most critical piece of this entire puzzle. In every single crash involving its public-facing Robotaxi service, Tesla has formally told federal regulators that the basic story of what happened on a public road is a protected trade secret. A cyclist was hit on a public street in Austin, Texas, but the details of how or why that happened are, according to Tesla, confidential. A car carrying a paying passenger crashed with a city bus, but the sequence of events is confidential. A person was injured and sent to the hospital, but the events that led to that injury are, according to Tesla, confidential business information. This is not normal. This is not how the system is supposed to work. In fact, it's utterly bizarre, and represents a grotesque abuse of the reporting process. For context, we looked at reports from Tesla's main rival in the autonomous space, Waymo, which runs a much larger, fully driverless service in multiple cities, including right there in Austin. Waymo has also reported crashes to the very same NHTSA database. Their reports are night and day compared to Tesla's. They provide a detailed, coherent narrative. They explain the road conditions, the speed of their vehicle, what their car's software perceived, what the other party did, and what happened as a result. Their reports are transparent. They allow the public, regulators, and safety experts to see what went wrong, so that everyone can have confidence that the failure is being understood, and more importantly, fixed. Tesla gives you a brick wall of black ink. The company is aggressively and cynically using a legal provision meant to protect proprietary source code and technical schematics as a blanket, to hide the entire factual story of every single public failure. This makes it impossible for anyone, the public, independent safety experts, even city officials in Austin, who are responsible for the safety of their citizens, to know why these cars are failing. Is FSD confused by construction zones? Does it fail to properly understand the movements of large vehicles like buses? Is it systemically failing to see and react to cyclists? We have absolutely no idea, because Tesla has made the unilateral decision that basic public safety information is a corporate secret to be protected at all costs. And the secrecy gets worse, layering deception on top of delay, in a way that seems almost purpose-built to mislead. In one incident from July 2025, the crash was initially filed as involving only property damage, a simple fender bender. But 5 months later, in December, Tesla quietly submitted a revision to the filing, upgrading the reported injury to minor W hospitalization. It took them almost half a year to formally admit to the government that someone was hurt badly enough to go to the hospital. It's another perfect, sickening fit for the pattern delay, obscure and downplay the truth, for as long as humanly possible, until you are forced to admit it, and then do so as quietly as possible. This level of suffocating secrecy is indefensible. For a technology that is being actively beta tested on public roads, using all of us as unwitting, non-consenting participants in the experiment. Without transparency, there can be no trust. If the system were truly learning and improving at the exponential rate, Tesla claims, you would think the company would be shouting its progress from the rooftops, detailing every solved problem as a badge of honor. By redacting everything, Tesla creates the exact opposite impression. It gives the powerful, unavoidable impression that they are desperately trying to hide a pattern of failures. They do not want the public, or perhaps more importantly, their investors, to see. Tesla's information warfare isn't just about delaying and redacting the negative. That's only half of the strategy. The other half is an incredibly slick, incredibly effective marketing operation. While the company aggressively hides the raw, messy, and inconvenient details of individual crashes, it simultaneously pushes a glossy, triumphant narrative of superhuman safety. This narrative is backed by its own, very carefully chosen and deeply misleading statistics. This is where we move from the hidden truth to the manufactured truth. Tesla's headline safety claim, the one you'll find plastered all over its quarterly safety reports, and its website, is, on its face, incredible. It's the number that ends all arguments. The company's latest reports from early 2026 claim that a Tesla with full self-driving engaged is vastly safer than the average human-driven car, sometimes by a factor of 5 or even 7 times. The newest, most impressive number suggests that FSD can travel, on average, 5.3 million miles before a major crash occurs. If you just take that number at face value, the debate is over. The machines have won. We should hand them the keys right now and ban humans from driving. But, like everything else in this story, the second you look closer, the second you ask the most basic questions about their methodology, the entire statistical edifice begins to wobble and then completely fall apart. Tesla's safety statistics are a masterclass in how to lie with numbers, a masterclass in how to fudge the data to get the exact result you want for your press release. There are three fundamental, deeply misleading problems with their math. First, there's the problem of data blending. In its reports, Tesla cynically lumps the data from its basics, highway-only autopilot system in with the data from its more advanced city-street FSD system. These are completely different systems, used in completely different environments. Driving on a divided, controlled access highway is statistically one of the safest activities you can possibly do in a car. The roads are straight. There are no intersections, no pedestrians, no cyclists. Navigating a chaotic city intersection with unpredictable traffic, however, is one of the most dangerous. By mixing the billions of relatively safe highway miles driven on basic autopilot with the far more challenging and failure-prone city miles driven on FSD, Tesla uses the safety record of the simpler system to artificially pump up the safety record of the more experimental and buggy one. It's the statistical equivalent of a struggling student, averaging their grades with the grades of the class valedictorian and claiming they're an A student. It's not just misleading, it's a deliberate distortion. Second, there is the problem of definitions. This one is even more insidious. What exactly does Tesla count as an FSD crash? According to their own methodology, a crash is logged against the system if FSD was active at any point within 5 seconds before the impact. This sounds reasonable at first glance, but it's cleverly designed to systematically exclude the system's own failures. Imagine a scenario where FSD is about to drive the car straight into a wall or into oncoming traffic. The human driver, paying attention as they are required to, screams, grabs the wheel 1 second before impact, and yanks the car to safety, but still clips another object in the process. In Tesla's world, that is not an FSD failure. Because the human disengaged the system, all the miles leading up to that critical intervention are counted as successful FSD driving. The system is only blamed if the human fails to intervene in time. This methodology systematically inflates the miles per crash number by counting the very moments the system was failing as moments it was succeeding. It's a circular logic that makes the system appear safer, the more it has to be saved by a human. But the third and most damning problem is the massive, undeniable contradiction between Tesla's polished marketing reports and the ugly reality of its own real-world tests. Let's go back to that Austin Robotaxi fleet. It's the same FSD software. It is the purest, most honest test case we have for its real-world capabilities. Tesla's marketing, printed in its official safety report, says its cars crash once every 5.3 million miles. For comparison, the average American driver, according to federal data, is involved in a police-reported crash roughly once every 500,000 miles. So, the official marketing claim is that FSD is nearly 10 times safer than a human. But the Austin fleet, with 14 known crashes in its first 800,000 miles of operation, is crashing approximately once every 57,000 miles. Let that number sink into your brain for a moment. The official marketing says it's nearly 10 times safer than a human. The real-world data from its own public trial shows it's crashing almost 9 times more often than the average human. And what's even crazier, what makes this contradiction so profound, is that every single one of those Austin Robotaxis has a trained human safety driver sitting in the driver's seat, whose only job is to be hyper-vigilant and intervene to prevent a crash. So the system is performing 9 times worse than a normal, distracted, multitasking human, even while it has a dedicated human babysitter, ready to slam on the brakes at a moment's notice. This isn't a small statistical blip or a rounding error. This is a complete and total demolition of the marketing narrative. It proves, with Tesla's own data, that the 5.3 million miles per crash number is a statistical fantasy. It's a number engineered for a press release, not for reality. This pervasive, multi-layered pattern of delays, redactions, and manipulated statistics isn't just happening in a corporate bubble. It is now at the very heart of a perfect storm of legal and regulatory action that threatens to tear down the entire myth of full self-driving once and for all. The system is starting to fight back. The pressure is coming from all sides. But one of the most significant blows came, not from federal regulators in Washington, but from a California administrative court. For years, the California DMV has been locked in a quiet but ferocious battle with Tesla over the very names of its products, autopilot and full self-driving. The DMV argued with stark simplicity that the names are a form of deceptive advertising because the cars cannot, in fact, pilot or drive themselves. In late 2025, an administrative law judge agreed, issuing a proposed ruling that found Tesla had engaged in deceptive marketing and that the names were effectively false. The judge's finding was a landmark moment. It stated clearly and unequivocally that Tesla's technology is a Level 2 driver assist system, a category of tech that, by definition, requires constant human supervision and intervention. It is not, by any legal or technical standard, self-driving. This wasn't a critic on Twitter or a skeptical journalist. This was a formal legal determination by a court of law. The legal battle is still ongoing as Tesla predictably appeals and fights the ruling. But the reputational damage was done. For the first time, a court had officially called out the lie at the core of the brand. At the very same time, federal regulators are closing in, moving beyond the procedural issue of late, reporting and targeting specific repeatable software failures. In addition to the major probe into cars running red lights and stop signs, there's another active investigation into how Tesla's FSD system performs in low-visibility conditions, specifically when there's sun glare. The concern is that the vision-only system, which relies exclusively on cameras and has no radar or LiDAR, can be effectively blinded by the sun, leading to dangerous failures. This probe affects nearly 2.4 million Teslas and shows that NHTSA is no longer just counting crashes, it's actively hunting for the systemic flaws that cause them. Then there's the court of public opinion, which is rapidly turning into actual court. A massive class action lawsuit is moving forward in California, with over 20,000 Tesla owners alleging that they were defrauded by the company's false promises about FSD's capabilities and timeline. They argue, persuasively, that they paid thousands of dollars for a feature that was promised to be feature-complete years ago, but remains a perpetually unfinished, unreliable beta product. And through it all, the human cost is becoming impossible to ignore, with federal investigators now linking dozens of fatalities nationwide to crashes, where Tesla's autopilot system was active. Each one of these tragedies puts more and more pressure on regulators to stop writing letters and start taking decisive, meaningful action. Finally, there's the feedback loop with the users themselves, the supposed core of the data-gathering operation. Many dedicated Tesla owners, true believers in the mission, talk about using the report bug feature, a button they can press to flag an FSD error in real time. This is supposed to be the key to the whole system, the crowdsourced data that helps Tesla improve at an exponential rate. But drivers consistently report that their detailed feedback, their eyewitness accounts of near disasters, just disappears into a black hole with zero acknowledgement or follow-up from the company. It's the same theme we've seen again and again: a total lack of transparency, a one-way street of data. It suggests a company that desperately wants your data, but has absolutely no interest in your input. A company that is collecting billions of miles of driving information, but is fighting every attempt by regulators, by courts, and by its own customers to hold it accountable for what that information actually shows. So we come back to the central question, the one we started with. What is the real reason Tesla is delaying, redacting, and misrepresenting its crash data? We started with Tesla's story, data collection issues. A simple, boring, bureaucratic screw-up from a busy, innovative company. But as we have seen, that explanation doesn't just fail to hold up under the slightest scrutiny. It's an insult to our intelligence. The evidence points not to incompetence, but to a deliberate, multi-pronged strategy of information control. A conspiracy of silence designed to protect a multi-billion-dollar narrative. The pattern is overwhelming, consistent, and undeniable. We see it in the months-long systemic delays of federally mandated crash reports, an act of defiance against the very agency meant to ensure public safety. We see it in their lawyers' absurd claim that providing basic safety data is unduly burdensome for one of the most advanced data companies on the face of the earth. We see it in the wall of black ink that turns every public robotaxi crash in Austin into a state secret, hiding the truth of public failures behind a veil of confidentiality. And most damningly, we see it in the giant, unbridgeable canyon between their marketing statistics that claim a crash every 5.3 million miles, and the hard, ugly reality in Austin, which shows a system crashing 9 times more often than a human driver, even with a professional safety monitor behind the wheel. The real reason for all this: secrecy isn't about hiding one bad crash or even a dozen. It's about preventing anyone from connecting the dots and seeing the pattern. The pattern of failures at unprotected left turns. The pattern of failures in bad weather or low-light conditions. The pattern of failures around emergency vehicles. The pattern of failures in dense, urban environments that completely and utterly contradicts the marketing fantasy of a superhuman machine. That pattern is the truth about the system's real capabilities. And that truth is far less safe, far less capable, and far less advanced than the full, self-driving label on the box wants you to believe. The strategy is brutally simple: control the story at all costs, delay bad news to soften its impact, and uncouple it from any specific software update. Redact crucial details to prevent any real, independent analysis of why the system fails, and simultaneously create your own set of polished, misleading statistics to build an alternate reality where the technology is already near perfect. It's a strategy designed to protect the stock price, to keep the dream of full autonomy alive in the minds of customers and investors, even if the reality on the road is a chaotic and dangerous mess. But that strategy is beginning to fail. The walls are closing in. All eyes are now on the federal investigations and the approaching March 9th, 2026 deadline for Tesla to finally hand over its raw data. Will they deliver the whole, unvarnished truth this time? Or will we get another last-minute letter from the lawyers? Another desperate request for an extension? Another chapter in this saga of delay and deception? The outcome of this confrontation will have enormous consequences, not just for Tesla, but for the entire future of autonomous technology. It will help decide if companies can continue to beta test their experimental software on all of us with zero transparency, or if a new era of serious data-driven oversight is finally about to begin. The Wild West era of self-driving. Development may, at long last, be coming to a close. The promise of this technology is real and profound, but it has to be built on a foundation of public trust. And trust can only come from transparency. Right now, Tesla's strategy of delay, redaction, and deception is burning that trust to the ground, with every late report and every blacked-out file. And we will be tracking this story every step of the way.